A story that's been making the rounds in mainstream media around the world in recent days, or mostly today and yesterday, is a story of the IDF raiding a house and in a raid that eventually ended with the death of a person with Down syndrome uh, killed by an IDF dog, according to the story. Now, this is going to be, I don't know, Down syndrome and autism. This is going to be I think, a different kind of episode in some senses. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work because there are different elements to this. There's the story as it is, which I think should be, if you treat it as it is and assume that everything in it is true, there's how we look at it in that sense. There's the fact that this is um, so mainstream and what that says about what the media wants to focus on. And of course, there's the general context of the war within yeah, and the media coverage of it. So let's just get to. I'm joined by Daniel, Kirk, and Jonathan. Hey guys, let's get to some of the story. I'm going to read it from a BBC article. I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm also not going to read it necessarily in order. I might jump back and forth a little bit. Um, but this is so the person in question here, the person who was killed is Mohammed Bar. I don't know how exactly to pronounce the name. He was 25 years old, had Down syndrome and autism. His mother, Nabila Bar, 70, told the BBC he didn't know how to eat, drink, or change his clothes. I'm the one who changed his nappies. I'm the one who fed him. He didn't know how to do anything by himself. On the 27th of June, the war came back to the Bar's family's neighborhood, and Mohammed's small world shrank further. Along with other residents of Shajaiya, east of Gaza City center, the Bars were given orders to evacuate by the Israeli Defense Forces. The IDF was advancing into Shajaiya in pursuit of Hamas fighters fighting from tunnels and houses. But the Bars were tired of moving. In a wary tone, Nabila, who is a widow, reeled off the names of relatives' homes where they, where they had sought shelter. Quote, we evacuated around 15 times. We would go to Jabril's place, but then there would be bombing at Jabril's place. We would go to Hyder Square, but then there would be bombing at Hyder Square. We would go to Rimal, but then there would be bombing at Rimal. We would go to Shawa Square, but then there would be bombing at Shawa Square. End quote. The fighting intensified in the streets around them. They would hide in different parts of the house, often in the bathroom, when shooting became especially intense. Quote, we were under siege for 7 days. The tanks and soldiers were all around the house. Mohammed was staying on his sofa. He didn't like sitting anywhere except for there, says Nabila. For Mohammed, war meant loud, violent sounds, the air vibrating with the concussion from shells exploding nearby. None of this could be explained to him. He would panic and say, I'm scared, Nabila remembers. He would say, hey, hey, thinking that somebody wanted to hit him. He was always scared, fearful. We would come around him, comfort him. He didn't understand much. His autism made it very difficult. Um, okay, this is where we get to the part where what happened. So on July 3rd, according to the family, the IDF raided their home on Nazaz Street. Nabila said there were several dozen soldiers with a combat dog, animals used to find Hamas fighters and check for booby traps and explosives. At first, she heard them breaking in and smashing everything, in her words, before the soldiers and dog arrived in the room. Referring to Muhammad, she says, I told him he's disabled, have mercy on him. He's disabled, keep the dog away from him. Nabila saw the animal attack Muhammad. And this is another quote. The dog attacked him, biting his chest and then his hand. Muhammad didn't speak, only muttering, no, no, no. The dog bit his arm and the blood was shed. I wanted to get him out, but I couldn't. No one could get to him, and he was patting the dog's head, saying, enough, my dear, enough. In the end, he relaxed his hand and the dog started tearing at him while he was bleeding. Uh, maybe we should pause here. So a part of my issue with this story is obviously that it is entirely told, it is a mainstream news story right now, and it is entirely told by the family. Now, part of this article also mentions that two of the sons of this woman were arrested and have yet to be released. Now, it doesn't mention what they were arrested over, but they were arrested. The IDF uh, we've covered on this channel people released by the IDF, including the director of Al Shifa Hospital, the Hamas headquarters, or the Hamas headquarters are located. The IDF releases people just because they don't have space for them. So if somebody gets arrested, it's and held for it's been 2 weeks. It's safe to assume there was reason why the IDF wants to hold him. This is not covered in this article. That should be mentioned. Like, this article is entirely the account of the family of Muhammad. Okay, we'll get to some more of this, but I want to get your initial thoughts on this, Jonathan.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. First of all, it is indeed, I think, a tragic death when somebody like that dies. He clearly has no direct responsibility over what's going on around him. So we should first mention that. I think that would be a fair thing to say. Now, look, the fact that his mother, according to the article, is now 70, gave birth to such a child at 45. And first of all, that she gave birth to perhaps is a shows a sorrow picture of the medical situation that life in a dictatorship entails, where you lack the basic medical ability to ascertain the condition of the child you're about to give birth to. Right now, well, I'm not an expert. If we had Michael, I'm sure we would have much more to say on that. But you would be able to know if the child you're going to give birth to is with Down syndrome, and whether or not he's going to be autistic. And that should still be up to the parents' decision. But still, she has chose to give birth to him. Now, again, I don't think she didn't have choice. There's no legal abortion in Gaza, as far as I'm aware. So that is again a sorrow state of affairs. That's what happens when you live in a dictatorship. That's what happens when you have intercourse in such a regime. You have to expect that something of this kind can happen. And that is indeed a sorrow state of affair, but it's her responsibility fundamentally. It's her and her family's responsibility that this human even came to existence. Now, whether or not the IDF was right, they are right to do anything that their commanders see fit. This is a war. They were forced to go there. They had the reasons to go into their house. They have very limited resources. So the fact that they were there, as Razi stated, implies that they had their reasons. And if not for October 7th, this wouldn't have happened. So the responsibility lies on the hands of the Palestinians. This mother should first of all accuse her dictators that they have led to this situation happen, that she lives in a place with such terrible medical amenities, and that her child was killed during battle, during this war. It is indeed tragic, but the responsibility is on the aggressor side, not on the defender side. And yeah, the way this article is written is horrible. The way that, yeah, as the title suggests, Jews are murdering the disabled. You can't get him more poor than that. He's autistic, he's Down syndrome, his mother is a widow, right? So she ticks all the boxes. So it's a perfect story. And those anti-Israelis, anti-Semites, anti-Zionists, whatever you want to call them, would make lemonade out of it. And the fact that we're now discussing this shows that they have been successful. So yeah, it's sorrow, but it's not Israel's responsibility fundamentally.
Kirk.
I do want to say up front, and as you alluded to, Razi, the fact that we only have the family's recollection of this, and that's all the story's based on. I hesitate to even comment on it because I don't really, as it was mentioned, like the fact that like two of the sons were arrested, we don't know why they were arrested, and my understanding is they're still under custody, and it's been 2 weeks. And as you said, Razi, like sometimes the IDF just releases people, including I guess combatants and members of Hamas just because they don't have enough space in jail or whatever. That's something I would like to know. Like, why were these two gentlemen arrested? Were they wrongfully arrested? Are they members of Hamas? Are they secretly working with them or whatever? I feel like that would be some nice context. In which case, yeah. But then again, like I don't know, so I hesitate to even comment on it because now I'm just speculating based on conclusions that I'm not even sure of if it's appropriate for me to draw at this point. But yeah, um, just a second, Jonathan's point. Yeah, this is all on Hamas. And it's not only the fact that they started this war, which prompted an IDF response, but it's the way in which they wage this war. They hide in tunnels. They hide a lot of their artillery in civilian homes and whatnot. And I've read stories on the Wall Street Journal throughout the year, these horror stories about how the IDF, they have to use robots and dogs and soldiers to go into tunnels and hiding places, which are often there are booby traps and other explosives that end up killing them. A lot of IDF soldiers have been maimed and disfigured as a result of this. And this is because Hamas, they know that the best weapon at their disposal, it's not guns or bombs or tanks or aircraft carriers, because they don't have a lot of that. They don't have good artillery. Their best weapon is sympathy, is for the world to pressure Israel to withdraw. And so they put civilians in harm's way, which results in if we're to take this story at face value, an innocent bystander getting killed horribly by a dog, which is something I greatly appreciate because, yeah, the idea of getting attacked by a big dog does terrify me. So when reading this story, I was like, yeah, this sounds pretty horrible. This sounds like my worst nightmare, getting attacked by a vicious dog. And you don't really get that context from these stories that we're reading on the BBC or MSN.
Daniel.
Yes, so someone is asking if we are sure this is not made up. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that, BBC is just literally just made a story out of thin air. The mother's testimony, when they quote her and such, probably did happen. I wouldn't go. I mean, I would expect BBC to actually, have some standards. But I think the big problem with these sort of story is, and I mean specifically the fact that, yeah, you are just getting one side. And this version, so we don't have the IDF comment yet. And actually the fact that the IDF is looking into it and hasn't made a statement yet. So the article we are commenting from BBC has about, I don't know, 20, 25 paragraphs. And the fact that IDF hasn't commented is mentioned in the second to last paragraph. So you're reading the whole story and only until the end, you realize you're only getting basically one side. And this was similar what happened with, Al-Ali Hospital. Quick story, we have to publish it. What numbers we have? The Hamas just made up 500. Let's publish 500. And then now it's still, that is the, in a sense, official story. When people talk about it, they still talk about the number 500. And in a similar way, even let's say the IDF, comments on it and, brings it more context, why they were there, why they were in that home specifically, what happened with the boy. That's too late. It's old news now. Now everybody remembers, IDF is using dogs to, attack disabled, well, not children in this case, but yeah, attacking disabled people who, have no way of taking care of themselves. And I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to sensational stories like this. Like, it's quick to publish, get whatever info we can. And, the fact that we don't have the full story is, like I said, buried in the second to last paragraph.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the BBC would make this up. But I do think somebody could make this up and the BBC will choose to believe and will choose to tell the story. And like you said, like with the Al-Ali Hospital so-called bombing and so many incidents since then, Israel attacks an aid convoy, Israel attacks a hospital or a school, Israel attacks that, bombs that ambulance. That's, there was no context there, even though the context was available. Uh, get the story out as soon as possible, because you can put that story on as a headline, and then the correction or retraction can be put somewhere as like a side story that nobody notices days later, and people had already taken to the streets, or people had done whatever they do. Twitter is already aflame, and people have more info to say why the Jews are so evil. And yeah, as I often mention on this show, the 500 people killed in Al Ali hospital by after an Israeli bombing is still a tweet that Jeremy Corbyn still has up. So, somebody put it out there, and the Jeremy Corbyns of the world will keep it up there, because somebody might scroll through his Twitter, find it, and say, well, here is more proof that the Jews are evil. There was yeah, Feral Lunch Lady asks, has BBC ever published a human interest story about a Jewish war victim? I would assume that in the days after October 7th, they would have had such stories. But overall, right now in this war, if you want to do such stories, you can do them about people in Israel. If you want to do stories about people who haven't been able to go home for nearly 10 months because their homes are bombed, and nobody is or their homes were burned down and in the invasion, you can do that. But why do that when you can tell a story like this? And yeah, so that's uh I think that's a very clear proof that the BBC has an agenda. Yeah, El Rito said this is not reporting news, it's activism. Yeah, it's activism in the form of reporting news, and by mainstream media. Um, so Jonathan, you mentioned, this is Hamas's fault, which of course it is. Everything that happens in the war that they started and that the Palestinian people fully support is their fault. But in this case, there is a bit more to it, because this is not, he didn't die in a bombing where they were bombing terrorists and he was in the area. They went into the home, and they went into the home because, again, there was reason to suspect two people, enough to arrest them and to hold them for 2 weeks. And the fact that this is completely ignored by the BBC, except to be mentioned as another something we should see as proof of Israel's evil. They just took two of his brothers, and we don't know who they are. I think that's how I see this in this case. There is no questioning of what the Palestinians do by mainstream media, and there is no questioning of what the Palestinians claim Israel does in the same articles. Jonathan.
Indeed, there's another thing in this Al Jazeera article, sorry, BBC article that she mentions. They've been evacuated 15 times, and I agree this is a bad thing. I think the IDF, and this is indeed a disgrace. These people should have been allowed to leave. They should have been treated like all refugees are treated, and they should have been allowed to go to Egypt, to go to Europe, to go to wherever. The fact that these people are still there after 10 months of war is indeed a bad thing, and this is Israel's wrongdoing. Now there are a lot of people at fault. There are the Egyptians, the Americans, whatever you want to say, but fundamentally, this is our war, and we were allowing these people to be stuck there, and that's not right. They should have been allowed to leave, and yeah, but still, any wrongdoing is on their responsibility. They initiated that, so yeah, that's still the case, however bad it is. And I think, especially now with the rise of Trump and the Republicans, it's important to reiterate the right to life, to abortion, that is, and they don't have that in Gaza. And again, that is also shows how anti-life this society really is.
Why should they have been allowed to leave?
Because it complicates warfare. We don't need that.
So
Mhm.
here's the thing, we saw months ago North Gaza, and people were showing images of the north of Gaza and how so many buildings were destroyed. The IDF told people to leave, then they bombed the north and supposedly took care of it. And now there's trouble in the north of Gaza
Mhm.
because when you allow people to leave, again, if they allowed this family to leave, then this genuine victim, as the story portrays him, if that is true, he's genuinely a victim. Uh, he would have maybe been okay, but his brothers, who are very likely not victims, would also have gotten away and would be able to continue. Again, like them being still alive and at large is possibly putting soldiers and civilians, Israeli civilians' lives in danger.
Yeah, if they go to Europe, they don't put the Israeli soldiers in danger. If they go to Egypt, the Israeli soldiers have to sweep through Gaza to find the hostages and get rid of all the fighters. If they go, it's not a concern anymore. We have to clear the ground, and there's a lot of work to be done. And these civilians, so-called civilians, are very much challenging our soldiers' work and have to deal with all these intricacies. So I think they should have allowed, some people might slip away, but they can't all go.
They'll go to Europe and then what? Bomb a kosher restaurant? I mean, look, I don't like kosher restaurants because, I like my food tasty, but I don't think they should be bombed. You're basically letting them get away with murder potentially.
Well, that'll be the Europeans' problem.
All right, Kirk.
I do want to push back on this talk about like the mainstream media frame stuff like this. I'm fine like criticizing like individual outlets or individual journalists. I don't know. I haven't really dug into like the journalists who wrote these pieces for the BBC and I think MSN. Maybe they are sympathizers with Hamas. I know that's been a huge thing, not even starting with this war, but throughout the history of Israel versus insert enemy. You've had, Al Jazeera reporters, I think Associated Press reporters being somewhat associated with Hamas or whatever. I think what one of the family that was holding one of the hostages, like one of the members of that family, I think, like did work for Al Jazeera or something. I remember. Anyway, this is the point I'm getting to: is like as bad as like members of the mainstream media can be when reporting and biased they are. In all fairness, I earlier I said in the Wall Street Journal and how I know about like all the tunnel systems and the risks that the IDF soldiers have to go through. I learn about that from reading a mainstream media outlet like the Wall Street Journal. And I read about the horror stories of the hostages and like what they went through after they got rescued. I read about that. I think I recall on CNBC and other mainstream outlets. So I do want to push back on this. Like people say, it's not journalism; it's activism. Maybe this is true here. I'm not. Then I don't know enough about the story, but I don't know. On one hand, like yeah, the members of the mainstream media might be either inadvertently or intentionally supporting the Palestinian cause or whatever. But on the other hand, they do also provide a lot of vital information that helps my perspective and illustrates what Israelis have had to go through throughout this whole war. So
I definitely don't think it's inadvertent. At least in many of their cases, it's very clearly not inadvertent if they are supporting the Palestinian cause, so to speak. But all right, we can. Yeah, I also want to get to why
I
this
will
story is
say though,
coming.
even if it is unintentional, they are playing right into the hands of Hamas by running stories like this. But on the other hand, I do appreciate that they do run stories like this because this is what war entails, and more reason why people should take war seriously whenever you're waging one, either in self-defense or if you're Hamas. It's like, yeah, this is what's going to happen to the population that you claim to want to govern over. Like you're going to ruin their lives.
Yeah, more reason not to start a war and not to let anybody start a war in your name. Daniel.
Yeah, I think I mainly agree with Kirk's point, and I'm wondering what like the best solution do that would be because, if this was a story, let's say replace the Palestinian woman with a Ukrainian, we would probably be a bit more, believing of the story. I'm not sure what the right thing would be. But because basically when it comes to media, they, let's say specifically BBC, I don't think they put that much attention. I'm really struggling to like form it. Basically, I'm figuring out what would be the best way to basically prevent this. Because again, this, in a sense, it could be just reporting. We have this one Palestinian woman, this is what she said, and we are publishing it. And we don't have a comment from the IDF. But again, I think the problem was that the point about IDF was like mentioned at the end. So maybe having some sort of rating at the start of the article, like, this is a reporting, we have one witness, and the military that has been involved hasn't commented yet. And you have this right at the start. I think something like that would be an interesting thing to try out, and then you have a following article, and it is, we have both sides comments, and you can publish that. You can take, in a sense, we are just reporting. So this is what we have, and take it how you want.
Thank you, Zion Perez, for the super chat. Zion Perez says, congratulations on reaching 20,000 subscribers. Thank you. We are hopefully on our way to 1 million within weeks, if not days. But yeah, 20,000 is still a milestone.
I think I looked at projections, like when we reach 1 million, it's gonna take a bit, but you guys can help to make it a bit faster.
And 8 months ago, it didn't look like we'll get to 20,000 at this point. So who knows? Anyway, so your point, Daniel, about if this was in Ukraine, maybe we would be more willing to believe it. Maybe, but it's not in Ukraine. That's the thing. You hear the war in Ukraine is covered differently. It is more about the war and what is going on in the fighting between the countries. Whereas here, so much of the coverage, and we unfortunately don't have the resources to do this kind of research, but I'd love it if some organization that covers how the media covers this actually showed us what percentage of articles about the war in mainstream media, especially let's call it left-wing mainstream media, is about the actual fighting, and how much is these individual stories or human interest stories. And by the way, even when they were covering the war, they were covering the war as propagandists in a sense. So there's that. There's okay, I may have had another point here, but actually, you know what? It's not urgent. Jonathan.
Sorry, Jonathan. Maybe let me just quickly make one point, because someone mentions, it is a report. But when you think about it, you are looking at the headline. So the headline, and it's similar to the way they report Hamas numbers. Gaza man with Down syndrome attacked by IDF dog and left to die. Mother tells BBC. And it's similar to 35,000 left in Gaza, reported by Gaza Health Ministry. So while it might be a report, and if you read it, you can understand what is the context, many people just look at the headline and just, share the headline, and they are done with it. I think that's a big problem when it comes to these things. Sorry, Jonathan.
One more thing should be mentioned, and I like to go to the fundamental reason why are we here. Is the way Israel has been handling this war for the past 10 months has been fundamentally immoral, because it has sacrificed its own soldiers, it has sacrificed its own civilians in prolonging this war for so long, and even allowing Hamas and the Palestinians to amass such power in Gaza for the last 20 years. This is all on Israel's. This is all a result of Israel's policy there. And we have to remember that. So, yes, it's the responsibility of the Palestinians, but we have been terrible. If Israel has acted differently, in the last decades, then perhaps at this point they would have been assimilated into Israeli culture. They would have embraced Western civilization, and they would have abortions and other individual rights, and they have much more advanced hospital cares and that kind of stuff. So we have to go back to the core issue, which is Israel had to fight this war swiftly. They had to give any consideration to saving, protecting civilians, or to give them food and petrol and all that. We shouldn't have allowed that, and that these things happen because of that. So I think we have to pray, and of course not to cut deals with the Palestinians, not to negotiate with them, not to embolden them. That's being anti-Israel. Israel has been acting against its own self-interest in that. So yeah, that is I think what we should also say, and it has to be reiterated.
And thank you, Jonathan, for bringing up abortion again, because it got some it got a conversation going in the chat, and of course engagement helps us get closer to that 1 million subscriber goal. Kirk.
I don't know if I have anything to add at the moment.
Daniel?
Maybe I'm gonna bring up back the idea, because yeah, Jonathan brought up the idea of like refugees and basically allowing Palestinians to live. And that is a bit interesting because yeah, I mean, the biggest problem when it comes to Palestinians, I mean, we just talked about UNRWA, and we really hope it runs out of money. And one of the biggest problems with UNRWA and being the sort of like a separate organization from, UN has actually, there are two organizations for refugees, one for Palestinians and one for the rest of the world. And the big difference between them is that the other one is, after some time, just trying to resettle the refugees in different countries, in different places, if the conflict keeps going on. I mean, there was a big Syrian refugee crisis. The war in that country is still going on. And, let's say the war just keeps going on. We are not expecting that these Syrian refugees will have that refugee status for like hundreds of years, or long time after this. Yet this is how it works with Palestinians. They keep their refugee status for so long that basically indefinitely they are keeping them refugees and are prolonging this conflict in this way. So letting some Palestinians leave, maybe there is a conversation, some episode. I think it could be interesting to see. But the biggest problem is that even if they left, UNRWA would keep them as refugees and would never try to actually resettle them in Europe or in any other country, in other Arabic nations.
And also, if I may add, the Syrian refugees are doing so much better now in Europe. Like Syrians who moved to Germany, moved to England, they have much better lives now. And the Palestinians could have the same prospect should we allow them to go and pursue a better life elsewhere. That is also very important.
Yeah, I'd just like us to be, if we're going to let people leave, I'd like to be selective about it. And Daniel, you mentioned UNRWA. Daniel, you saw my one episode series, Razi Goes to a Bookstore, on WhatsApp, right? So I mentioned that series because I'm very proud of it. It's first of all, I think I'm the first person to ever have a series on WhatsApp. I think that's my invention. I'm also maybe the first person to have a series that only has one episode, but I mentioned it because members of the Ayn Rand Center UK at any level, from £10 and above, get access to our WhatsApp groups. And so when I mention it, that's me trying to raise funds. When Philippe Lazzarini says that UNRWA is running out of money, that's his way of raising funds. People have different fundraising methods. Some sell you the benefits of contributing to their cause. Others say, we're running out of money, and if you don't give us money, people will die. So UNRWA is not running out of money. That's a long way to say that while encouraging people to click the link in the chat and become a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Years ago, when I was in my late teens or early 20s, I saw these reports. I got these reports. I think it's from the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, but it could have been B'Tselem. Either or both of them were very left-wing anti-Israel organizations. And I was looking at it, and there were, you know, people were reporting that, like, the report gave what people said happened to them, the torture that they had gone through by Israelis. And so I look, and there's a report, there's another person saying what he went through, and another person saying what he went through. And I asked the person who put the report together, what were they arrested for? And the answer was, it doesn't matter. We don't care. We don't put it in there. What matters is that they are victims. It doesn't matter what you chose to do in life, if you face consequences that we think you shouldn't face. So again, this is something that this story reminds me of. In the greater context of this war, it doesn't bring that context into it. In the context of this specific family home, it doesn't matter why the IDF chose to go into that home. What matters is bad things were done to somebody, and Israel is responsible, and here's how we portray it that way. Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to add. I am just looking at the Israeli news, and I'm here, like the head of the Mossad is saying the girls have very little time left in captivity, which I think is outrageous, but it might be beyond the topic of this live, Razi.
Yes, I think we're going to talk about the hostages tomorrow, actually, in the conversation around that in Israel. Okay, I'll go to Kirk and Daniel, and then there's something else I want to bring up. But Kirk, anything to add?
Going earlier to this whole debate about whether or not Palestinians should have been allowed to leave Gaza. I don't know where I stand on that, but to your point, Razi, wasn't this a problem when the United States invaded Afghanistan? Was that the United States essentially allowed the Taliban and Al Qaeda to just flee the country, and a lot of those fighters either went to hiding in Afghanistan, but many of them fled to Pakistan, where they just waited. They imposed their form of Sharia law on wherever they took over, and they just waited until the time was right to come back in and set up their wonderful caliphate.
Yeah, I think it's a bit different because it is difficult to leave Gaza unless somebody kind of allows you safe passage. Whereas in Afghanistan, the whole build up to that, the U.S. gave them a month from or nearly a month from 9/11 until they actually did something. And even when they did, they dropped aid before they dropped any bombs. And Afghanistan is massive. Like, you can hide in Afghanistan somewhere in the mountains, and yeah, you can cross to Pakistan where you're not at risk really. So yeah, it's I think there's a difference, but in both cases I'm not a fan of letting people get away. And civilians who want to get away, well, give up the combatants, and then we'll let you get away. That's a good policy. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to finish that, I'm wondering to what extent it even is like maybe like a question of principle about like letting Palestinians live rather than just a question of like, what do we know? Can we safely, let civilians live without, militants going out with them? Can we, what would be after that? Let's say if this helped make it easier or make it easier to conduct war, how would you do it afterwards? Would you let all of them come back in? Is there a problem that you're just gonna let all the militants go out and then allow them to come back in after that? So I think it's the big question, at least for me, it's more like the practical part. Like, would this actually help end this conflict faster or make it better long term?
I mean,
I'm very much doubtful that the Syrians who are now in Germany want to go back, especially their children. And this is a very, very good point, Daniel. But still, they lose their property rights as soon as they launch war, as soon as they invade Israel, as soon as they did October 7th. So as far as Israel is concerned, if it is in its interest, they could say, no, you can't go back. We're sorry. We need this place for a military base.
I also think that like talking about civilians, look, with this story that we're talking about, it does bring up the fact that there could be somebody. I always say on this channel, children are always innocent, even if they're armed and shooting at you, they're innocent. And somebody in the state of this guy, as he's described in the article, falls under the same category. Like he can't be guilty of supporting Hamas or opposing Hamas because he doesn't have the capacity to do either. But the civilians are not the main issue of the war. For me, it's very clear, and it was to me it was clear before October 7th, but I don't think it can be not clear after October 7th. Everybody involved with Hamas directly in any way cannot live after October 7th. I don't care if you were, again, like doing bookkeeping for them, and there's a lot of bookkeeping to be done for Hamas. They get a lot of money. If you're, serving them afternoon tea, it doesn't matter. Like you're involved in any way, you do not get to live. And if you were just going about your daily life knowing that mass slaughter of innocent civilians is planned in your name, and you didn't care one way or the other, I don't care one way or the other either, what happens to such a person. So for me, there's a very clear goal in this war, which is Hamas needs to be eliminated. The Palestinian culture and way of life that celebrates the slaughter of Jews needs to be eliminated. And what form exactly takes place afterwards doesn't matter as long as those goals are achieved, and that's all there is to it. But I do want to go to the use of dogs at war. Because this is also this is an issue. Israel has been using dogs. We mentioned this, and actually in the production meeting we had before the Daily Objective, James mentioned that something about a long list of different types of animals that Israel uses
that
at
was
war.
me.
Oh, that was you. Sorry. Yeah, I think James mentioned the history of the use of dogs in warfare, and yeah, I mean, we know obviously about the use of dogs in tunnels. When the IDF started the ground operation, they knew the tunnels are a big part of what needs to be taken care of, and they also knew that the tunnels are death traps. And I know people in our audience will be upset with me even over this, but yeah, I would rather risk the life of a dog than risk the life of a soldier. All right, now that we are canceled by many around the world who haven't yet canceled us, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's good that we use dogs. We would want to minimize casualties for our brave soldiers, and if we can use dogs, if we have a dog casualty instead of a soldier, that's a great thing. It is unfortunate when dogs also die. They're lovely animals, but yeah, that's a great thing that we can do. And one comment mentioned, at least they are not using tigers. So see how humane the Israelis are. At least they're not releasing the tiger as one should be when one is fighting fresh fruit, if you get the reference.
Kirk maybe got the reference.
Well, I agree with you, Rozzy. It's better to use dogs than humans, but I do got to admit, I do have this double standard, especially when watching like Game of Thrones. Like, I get more upset about like the dragons getting hurt and the animals getting hurt than I do like humans. I don't know what it is, but I don't know. It's something that so it's like, well, the animals, they don't know any better. They're just drugged into this war. Like, they didn't have a choice to like enlist in this army, and they're just drugged into wars and then killed in the battlefields and whatnot. So. I get it.
I don't know. I mean, I think it also depends. In Game of Thrones, when Ramsay Bolton is eaten by his own dogs that he sent to eat so
Oh
many
no,
other
that was
people.
satisfying. That was
Yeah,
satisfying.
I'm with you on that. But no, there are characters, when they burn a poor little girl because their God told them to,
Oh, that
yeah,
was the
we
worst
felt,
part of Game of Thrones.
yeah, I agree. That was the worst part, and there were many animals that died, and it was not as bad as that. But yeah, we'll have
Well, no,
our.
but that wasn't in a war context. Usually when there's like a battle, like I feel worse like when the dragons or the horses die than I do like when then seeing like hundreds of dudes like just slaughtering each other. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something I gotta unravel. I don't know.
By the way, it was in a war context. She was burned because then the god of light was going to give them the
Yeah.
victory. But anyway, we'll do a
But it
whole
wasn't in a
show.
battle
Some,
context.
I hope someday we'll get to do a whole show on Game of Thrones or several. But back to the use of dogs, Daniel.
Um, I mean, one thing to point out, I mean, about the fact how, well, let's go back to Game of Thrones. Kirk mentioned that he feels more bad for the animals. I think that is, in a sense, makes sense in the fact that animals don't have any moral blame, don't hold any moral blame or moral benefit. I mean, they have no free will, they have no choice to choose otherwise. They just act based on, they just act automatically in a sense. And especially in the context of the Game of Thrones. I mean, I only watched a little bit, but basically in worlds like this, basically everyone is evil. There's like very, in the Middle Ages, it's not like you have Hungarians fighting against, I don't know, Austrians or whatever, and it's like one side is good and one side is bad. These are both like, in a sense, absolutist monarchs, just like sending people into meat grinder for no reason. Uh, so it makes sense that, in a sense, in those situations, you would feel bad for the animals who, in a sense, have no choice in the matter. Uh, but something I want to bring up, because Jonathan mentioned at least they don't use tigers. Well, Palestinians, wouldn't you have to believe that? Because there are a lot of conspiracy theories. I mean, I'll just maybe just for a quick fun session, these are all the animals that Palestinians, this could be Hamas or Palestinian Authority, or I think even in some cases Hezbollah. These are animals that those people have claimed that IDF uses for basically for their operations. So it's kestrels, bee eaters, vultures, eagles, griffin vultures, sharks, dolphins, pigs, rats, cattle, and reptiles. All of those have at some point the Palestinians claimed IDF uses against Palestinians. I really recommend the Wikipedia article because it also lists when some of them have been like mentioned 10 years ago, some of them 15, but it's a really fun read.
Yeah, seeing the dolphins make their way through the rubble of the streets of Gaza really is cruel and inhuman punishment. Um, there was okay.
I think specifically with dolphins was like they were in the area and they claimed, oh, they have like a chip in them and they can track the movements of some ships or whatever.
Yeah, Jewish dolphins are different from normal dolphins. Um, okay, there's a paragraph here that I want to read. So it starts with a. Does it start with a quote? Yes, it starts with a quote. I believe from Nabila, the mother. They told us to be quiet and aimed their guns at us. They put us in a room by ourselves, and Muhammad was alone in another room. They said we will bring a military doctor to treat him. At one point, according to Nabila, a military doctor arrived and went into the room where Muhammad was lying. Uh, now, this is an interesting thing just because, again, we're talking about a war and we have some knowledge of what the other side has done in this war. In particular, when they started the war, we have a lot of footage from Hamas terrorists and what they did in Israel, and we have, as far as I know, no account of even one doctor being involved, being there with Hamas to treat their victims, uh, which is kind of telling about the differences in cultures between the side that the BBC wants you to support and the side that they want you to think is evil, and yet the BBC really wants you to come to a different conclusion than any decent human would come to. Jonathan.
Well, you could argue, Razi, that the fact that we bring doctors with us makes us more altruistic, and the fact that we treat our own enemy perhaps is not that of a positive thing about us. The fact that we feed our enemy, we treat them, we give them all sorts of goodies and benefits. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a positive thing about our culture. The fact that our soldiers have to sacrifice their lives in order to protect such hostile civil population is not a positive thing. I think it's a negative. It shows that we are an altruistic society, a particularly altruistic one. And as we know in this channel, that is the most evil form of most evil code of ethics, altruism. So I'm not sure about that.
Yes, although I think the doctors are there with the IDF mostly to take care of the IDF's wounded. And I don't know if they had that for Hamas soldiers either, because they don't value their own lives.
Well, we saved the life of Mr. Sinwar, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if our soldiers are treating those evil bastards.
Saved his life, then released him in the hostage deal. And this is for tomorrow's episode, but this is important to remember when we see Israelis demanding a hostage deal. Yeah, and also some of the Hamas terrorists who were in Israel on October 7th and were wounded were treated in his Israeli hospitals, which it's not surprising, but is nonetheless disgusting. I would like to see them, their injuries being utilized to get any information that can be you can get out of them, and then to send them to their 72 virgins. Kirk.
Kirk?
I know you oh, I didn't okay, so I didn't hear my name. I'm like, did he come to me yet? I don't know. Sorry about that. Yeah, I get the perspective that the IDF has been they wage wars based on the ethics of altruism, but I guess I would push back and ask, what about like showing like the civilians in enemy territory that like you're not monsters, and trying to show a little bit of goodwill, especially when there's like a legitimate accident, like a dog attacking a mentally disabled person. It's like, well, clearly we did not mean for this to happen. And now this poor innocent civilian who's mentally disabled is suffering. Wouldn't it be nice to, get this guy patched up and make sure he doesn't die, to show this family that, we're genuinely trying to find bad guys. If you guys are innocent civilians and are not aiding and abetting or supporting Hamas, then we're all on the same team here. Is there anything to that?
Yes, there is some, but look, the Palestinians, I think, do know better for the most part. Like they're not that detached from Israelis. They're not completely unaware. It's not like North Korea where you have no idea of what anywhere else in the world is like. So yeah, I give them less credit generally, but also I would say, look, if there happens to be a doctor there and there happens to be a genuinely innocent person wounded, I have no issue with taking care of them, but I wouldn't do it in order to show them that we're not that bad. Because if you somehow think that there's any justification for what Hamas has done, then there's no attempting to prove anything to such a person. Daniel?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about the Kirk's points about innocence being, I don't know what would be right word, maybe benevolent or sort of like, willing to basically, being friendly in a sense with Palestinian civilians. Because again, the biggest reason this war keeps going on is because Hamas still enjoys popular support. They still, many civilians hold the hostages in their homes, and work in different way. We know about the employees in the hospitals know about the fact that Hamas is there. with so many tunnels, many civilians do know what's going on, and in a sense are not helping in the way they should be. So while I do see, I think, because after I'm trying to like compare it to some other wars, you know, when it comes to like Japan and America, you know, before Japanese people surrendered, they were literally starving. They were on the brink of starvation. It was terrible from them. And after they surrendered, the Americans came in, the fed Americans, fed up, really, they really saw how different it is. And I think that has a big psychological influence to basically turning a culture around. And when you have Palestinians in, let's say, the Israeli controlled areas, not feeling, in a sense, the consequences of starting the war, I'm trying to think of the day after, what's going to happen after. Will we see, Palestinians, being, in a sense, turning around? Because we didn't see it last time. Israel was already occupying Gaza, yet out of Gaza came the first and second Intifada, and basically Israel had to pull out, or basically gave up and pulled out because they thought they are, in a sense, not able to hold on to it. So while I do see, this could be, showing benevolence could show some benefit in the future. In a sense, it could also really show them that Israel is not strong enough to actually have presence, have this sort of like being able to stand up for itself and show this is the consequences of your actions.
So I think I'm gonna wrap up with Susie's comment in the chat. Susie says, Jewish dolphins is Kyle's dad in South Park transitioning into a dolphin. I don't remember that.
You remember?
Was that was that in recent years or?
I don't know what episode. I saw it, but I have no idea when it was.
Well, I will look it up, but yeah, look, a South Park reference is like a super chat. It gets read. It's a Seinfeld reference is like a more expensive super chat, but this is a
I made
super
a
chat.
Monty Python reference, which is, I
Uh,
think, much more valuable.
I haven't watched it, so any final words, Jonathan? And
My
where can people find you?
my final words are: go to philosophy.com. This is my blog. I write about art and philosophy. Link in the description.
Kirk, final words, and where can people find you?
You can find me on Elon Musk's website at Kirk Wilcox. And, we were talking about kosher food earlier. The other day, I was in an Israeli grocery store and I saw they had a frozen Passover pizza. Is that something you'd recommend, Razi?
Nothing Passover. Do not eat anything that's kosher for Passover. It's worse than normal kosher. Because
I was about to say, ironically, that made me want to pass over that section of the freezer.
that's a good call. Daniel.
So for a second, I was wondering if it's like because in my mind, I was thinking of like Shabbat pizza or something, like Shabbat frozen pizza. But then I was thinking, how do you like heat it up then?
Well, you get a Gentile to heat it up for you, and then it's
Oh, I
okay.
heard that there's a term for that, isn't there?
I
For like,
mentioned it on yesterday's show. That's where you heard it.
yeah, you can find me at Damn Dan on YouTube, and link to that is also in the chat.
I'm Razi Ginsburg on X. We'll be back here tomorrow. We'll be talking on the reality show. We'll be talking about the hostages and the discourse around that in Israel. On the Daily Objective, we will be talking about America's Got Talent. Make sure you tune into that. Thanks for watching. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys, for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.